While Ronald Reagan himself was dedicated to dismantling the Department of Education, he surrounded himself by advisors with conflicting views on the topic. Ed Meese, who served as counsel to President Reagan from 1981 to 1985, referred to the Department of Education as a great bureaucratic joke. But Reagan's Secretary of Education, Terrell Bell, was an ardent supporter of federal funds to support education. However, despite Bell's inclination to increasing federal spending on education, the early signs pointed to the Reagan administration following through on its vow to cut Washington's bureaucracy. Terrell Bell was not even invited to Ronald Reagan's first State of the Union address, which many experts took as symbolism that Reagan was indeed going to defund the department as a means of abolishing it. In addition, there was a famous and foreshadowing political cartoon in which the presidential cabinet room was empty with labels on each chair, and the chair for the Secretary of Education was an electric chair. When Bell took over as Secretary of Education, the federal government was spending about $165 billion each year on education, and by 1988 it had increased spending to about $308 billion. How could the spending increase so drastically under a president who had vowed to abolish the Department of Education and sought to cut all federal funding to education? The answer is largely the impact of Terrell Bell as the Secretary of Education. Bell wrote about how the GI Bill of Rights after World War II, which was a taxpayer investment in the returned soldiers, yielded many benefits to society and financial dividends in the form of tax revenues returning to the government, as their education made taxpayers out of tax consumers. Similarly, he believed that federal investment in the education of the youth of the nation would benefit the country in the long run by helping to produce productive, tax-paying citizens. As Secretary of Education, Bell's budget when he came to office was $14.5 billion each year. His tasks included allocating these funds to school districts and colleges, and he was also responsible to Congress to ensure that there was oversight to make sure that the funds were being utilized as they were meant to be under the provisions of the laws. Bell was also charged with supporting equal education opportunity and allocating $3.5 billion each year to schools to provide special help to enhance learning for disadvantaged children. Additionally, the Department of Education's responsibilities included keeping schools informed of new and improved ways of teaching the disadvantaged and to administer a law enacted to guarantee free and appropriate education for all handicapped children in the United States. Ultra-conservatives, empowered by President Reagan's rhetoric, called for the federal government to cease all funding of education. Opposition to all federal spending on education included opposing the federal government's support of the Women's Educational Equality Act, school desegregation assistance grants, teacher center funding, and student loan programs for attending post-secondary education. In his role of Secretary of Education, Bell worked to increase federal funding in the midst of all the political pressure to do away with federal funding for education. Bell faced a stiff challenge from Ed Curran, the director of the National Institute of Education, who called for an end to funding because it wasted money and didn't do anything. The episode concluded with Curran's firing, with Bell able to retain his position. Break for Bell came when the report A Nation at Risk was released in 1983 by the National Commission on Excellence in Education. The ideas embodied in A Nation at Risk mirrored Bell's desires to increase federal spending, and with the report he had a powerful resource to use in supporting his claims. The Commission noted that the federal government plays an essential role in helping meet the needs of key groups of students, such as the gifted and talented, the socioeconomically disadvantaged minority and language minority students, and the handicapped. The Commission also noted that the federal government must also help ensure compliance with constitutional and civil rights, and provide student financial assistance and research and graduate training. These findings of the Commission, President Reagan's vehement rhetoric against the Department of Education began to decrease. In addition to the suggestions outlined in the report, A Nation at Risk estimated that 23 million Americans were illiterate. With these findings and calls for at least 3 years of math and science in secondary education, federal government's funding for education was increased.
Included in the report A Nation at Risk was a letter in the front cover addressed to the Secretary of Education. In the letter it said, "Our purpose has been to help define the problems afflicting American education and to provide solutions, not search for scapegoats. We addressed the main issues as we saw them, but have not attempted to treat the subordinate matters in any detail. We are forthright in our discussion and have been candid in our report regarding both the strengths and the weaknesses of American education. The Commission deeply believes that the problems we have discerned in American education can both be understood and corrected if the people of our country, together with those who have public responsibility in the matter, care enough and are courageous enough to do what is required." The beginning pages of the report started by saying, "Our nation is at risk." Our once unchallenged preeminence in commerce, industry, science, and technological innovation is being overtaken by competitors throughout the world. This report is concerned with only one of the many causes and dimensions of the problem, but it is the one that undergirds American prosperity, security, and civility. We report to the American people that while we can take justifiable pride in what our schools and colleges have historically accomplished and contributed to the United States and the well-being of its people, the educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by the rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very nature as a nation and a people. What was unimaginable a generation ago has begun to occur. Others are matching and surpassing our educational attainments. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we have allowed this to happen to ourselves. We have even squandered the gains in student achievement made in the wake of the Sputnik Challenge. Moreover, we have dismantled essential support systems which have helped make these gains possible. We have in effect been committing an act of unthinking, unilateral educational disarmament. Our society and its educational institutions seem to have lost sight of the basic purposes of schooling and of the high expectations and disciplined effort needed to attain them. This report, the result of 18 months of study, seeks to generate reform of our educational system in fundamental ways and to renew the nation's commitment to schools and colleges of high quality throughout the length and breadth of our land. That we have compromised this commitment is, upon reflection, hardly surprising, given the multitude of often conflicting demands we have placed on our nation's schools and colleges. They are routinely called on to provide solutions to personal, social, and political problems that the home and other institutions either will not or cannot resolve. We must understand that these demands on our schools and colleges often exact an educational cost as well as a financial one. On the occasion of the Commission's first meeting, President Reagan noted the central importance of education in American life when he said, "Certainly there are few areas of American life as important to our society, to our people, and to our families as our schools and colleges." This report, therefore, is as much an open letter to the American people as it is a report to the Secretary of Education. We are confident that the American people, properly informed, will do what is right for their children and for the generations to come. History is not kind to the idlers. The time is long past when America's destiny was assured simply by an abundance of natural resources and inexhaustible human enthusiasm, and by our relative isolation from the malignant problems of older civilizations. The world is indeed one global village. We live among determined, well-educated, and strongly motivated competitors. We compete with them for international standing in markets, not only with products but also with the ideas of our laboratories and neighborhood workshops. America's position in the world may once have been reasonably secure with only a few exceptional, well-trained men and women. It is no longer. The risk is not only that the Japanese make automobiles more efficiently than Americans and have government subsidies for development and export. It is not just that the South Koreans recently built the world's most efficient steel mill, or that American machine tools, once the pride of the world, are being displaced by German products. It is also that these developments signify a redistribution of trained capability throughout the globe. Knowledge, learning, information, and skilled intelligence are the new raw materials of international commerce and are today spreading throughout the world as vigorously as miracle drugs, synthetic fertilizers, and blue jeans did earlier. If only to keep and improve on the slim competitive edge we still retain in world markets, we must dedicate ourselves to the reform of our educational system for the benefit of all, old and young alike, affluent and poor, majority and minority. Learning is the indispensable investment required for success in the information age we are entering. Our concern, however, goes well beyond matters such as industry and commerce. It also includes the intellectual, moral, and spiritual strengths of our people, which knit together the very fabric of our society. The people of the United States need to know that individuals in our society who do not possess the levels of skill, literacy, and training essential to this new era will be effectively disenfranchised, not simply from the material rewards that accompany competent performance, but also from the chance to participate fully in our national life. The level of shared education is essential to a free, democratic society and to a fostering of a common culture, especially in a country that prides itself on pluralism and individual freedom. For our country to function, citizens must be able to reach some common understanding on complex issues, often on short notice and on the basis of conflicting or incomplete evidence. Education helps form these common understandings, a point Thomas Jefferson made long ago in his justly famous dictum. "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves, and if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion." Part of what is at risk is the promise first made on this continent. All, regardless of race or class or economic status, are entitled to a fair chance and to the tools for developing their individual powers of mind and spirit to the utmost. This promise means that all children, by virtue of their own efforts, competently guided, can hope to attain the mature and informed judgment needed to secure gainful employment and to manage their own lives, thereby serving not only their own interests but also the progress of society itself.
Given the suggestions given in the report, federal spending was largely increased on education. The states with the lowest academic achievement started to make what Reagan supporters lauded as significant gains. For example, in South Carolina, a state with 41% minority enrollment in public schools, SAT scores increased by 36 points compared to the national average of 13. Additionally, Mississippi, the lowest ranked state, doubled the national average in ACT point gain. Though testing scores for the poverty-stricken increased during the Reagan years, populous states such as New York and California only saw modest gains in testing during Reagan's years as president. This has led many critics to proclaim that the Reagan era was a time when there was a rise in educational spending, but a drop in achievement. This claim was supported by the 1988 study conducted by the American Council on Education and Education Commission of the states that found that in education, employment, income, and other areas that gaps were persisting and that in some cases were widening between members of minority groups and the majority population. Its conclusion was that America was moving backwards. Although the Reagan administration increased spending and the disadvantaged made gains, the achievement gap was largely unchanged. Many successful bilingual programs were discontinued in the 80s, and many states even declared bilingual education illegal during this time period. Terrell Bell was forced out of his cabinet position following Reagan's first term in office, as Reagan still claimed to want to abolish the Department of Education during his re-election campaign. Despite the failure to decrease the achievement gap or increase educational quality during his 8 years in office, Reagan has gone on to be lauded as an American hero by conservatives, and many believe that he fulfilled his 1980 campaign pledge of restoring the great and confident roar of the American progress, growth, and optimism. Rather than dismantling the federal government's role in education, Reagan's legacy in regard to education policy should be the further integration of the federal government and public education. Under his administration, calls for more attention to be placed on testing and for teacher salaries to be based on merit pay were pushed to the forefront of policy discussion.
America's youth, our next generation, must be prepared to help build their future. A vital step in that direction is practicing democracy in the classroom.